Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today's video is all about food illustration. So I put a post on Instagram where I asked you to ask me some questions. So I'm going to be doing a Q&A and I'm also going to be showing you a few food illustrations that I worked on. So a few speed paints, and I'm going to be trying to describe to you my technique, kind of give you a bit of an explanation. It's going to be quite difficult for me to do because just a lot of what I do is kind of instinctive at this stage. So putting it into words might be a bit hard, but I'm going to try. Before I get into the Q&A, I wanted to introduce you to the sponsor for this video, which is Skillshare. So Skillshare, if you don't know, is an online learning community for creators with more than 25,000 classes in design, illustration and more. Premium membership gives you unlimited access, so you can join the classes and communities that are just right for you. Whether you want to fuel your curiosity, creativity or even career, Skillshare is a perfect place to keep you learning and thriving in 2019. On Skillshare, you'll find numerous classes on illustration from really renowned illustrators, and you'll also find some courses on food illustration. So please do check the link under this video for a 2-month free trial. In today's video, I'm going to be working on a couple of food illustrations for my upcoming cookbook, and there were a few questions about that, so I will be answering those in the video. But my first question that I'm going to answer is about texture, and as you can see right now, I'm working on the texture of the bread, the toast that these mushrooms are on. And I think texture is incredibly important when it comes to food illustration because it really helps to separate the items that you're trying to depict, and more than that, I think it helps to evoke a sense of the actual food that you're painting to the viewer. They'll see the texture of the bread and they'll think about how crunchy toast is and how moorish it is. When you think about it, the texture of food in real life is really important. You don't want to eat something that's really slimy or off-putting. Depicting the texture of food really well is important, and that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go down the realistic route like I tend to do. It's just really your artist's interpretation of the texture. When illustrating food, I think the most important thing is that it's worthwhile. What do I mean by that? Well, a good question to ask is, why isn't this a photograph? Food photography is obviously the leading competitor to food illustration, so you really need to have an edge above it if you want to be a food illustrator. To me, food illustration is most exciting when you can see the mark making of the artist and get a sense of their relationship with the food and why they've chosen to recreate it. I don't necessarily think it's enough to make sure it's realistic. It has to have character, and character that a photograph could never capture. So I got a fair few questions on my technique, on how I layer colours, choosing colours, and how I developed my style in the first place. What I will say is that I'm not one for making painting tutorials. I'm not really a big believer in them. I think the best way that you can learn about painting is ideally to be doing it, to be practicing on a daily or weekly basis whenever you can, and also I guess observing how other people mark make is useful. So that's why I try and include speed paint footage in a lot of my videos, just because I don't think it's something you can really explain in words. It's just how the painting comes together. And my style developed in a very natural way. I wasn't able to force it. It just happened through experimenting in my sketchbooks and drawing a lot from life and using a lot of different mediums in the start. Finding out I really loved painting, finding out I loved how simplistic and quick watercolour could be. I chose it over using much heavier paints like oil or acrylic for that reason, because I loved how light and quick it could be, although I take a long time over my paintings these days. But yeah, I just think the most important thing to develop your style or to improve your skills is just to practice as much as possible in a no pressure way, in a way that is curious and experimental with no pressure. You're just figuring out how you want to lay your paint down. Certainly looking at other artists can be useful, but you want to develop your own style as well. Studying objects, whether that's in real life or from photographs, and really just trying to find colour, texture, interest in those subjects. Just noticing where your eye goes to and what you're genuinely drawn to can be really important for discovering your style. So we're coming towards the end of this first painting now. I had a few questions on how I know when a painting is finished, and that's something I still struggle with to this day. As you can see, when I'm coming to the end of this, I'm just trying to pull certain pieces of the painting forward. So I've added more dark kind of grey black tones around the mushrooms. The bread was a little bit burnt, so I think that really helped to bring out the light colours of the mushrooms. So here's another tip for finishing up a food illustration. Focus on the garnish. You can see I'm adding black pepper and I've also got some herbs on there. I think garnish is really important with real life food and also food illustration. It just helps to finish up the piece and add these fun little bits of detail that stop it from looking like a blob of brown mush, which is what mushrooms on toast could potentially look like without the garnish. I got so many questions about references. I think that was my most common question, where I find references, whether clients send me references, whether I work from photographs or in real life. So I'm going to explain that a little bit, and it's relevant because we're starting a new piece, which is actually a painting from one of my own photographs of a dish I made. So this is going to be Jackfruit Tagine, really delicious. And this is actually a photograph of some leftovers we had the next day, which looked really nice and appetizing, so I thought I would paint them. When it comes to references, especially for client work, I will use the internet to find photographs to work from. Sometimes they supply their own, but usually I find that I want to use the internet to find further imagery to work from and to incorporate, so I'm not just working from one photograph. And that would be my biggest tip when it comes to references, to make sure you are working from more than one photograph if possible, and especially if you have found a photograph from the internet, because it's just not a good idea to copy directly someone's photograph. For the previous painting, which is mushrooms on toast, I didn't have my own photograph, so I used a couple that I found on Pinterest, and I will include those photos now, and you can see that I worked across both of them, so the end result doesn't look like either photograph specifically. So I noticed that I'm kind of grouping questions together and not really answering one specifically, but I hope that's okay because it's kind of helpful for me to work through this video. I noticed a lot of questions about client work and about how to find work in food illustration, whether it is a lucrative area of the illustration world to get into, how I started finding clients, that sort of thing. So if you are new to my videos, I am a full-time freelance illustrator, and I've been full-time for 6 years. Food illustration was the first thing that I wanted to get really stuck into. I was looking at a lot of magazines and I could see that they were still using photography, which is great. Like, food photography can be really beautiful and amazing and inspiring, but some of it I thought was a little bit boring, and I wanted to offer them an alternative. I did a self-initiated project all about breakfast foods, and that secured me my first few proper jobs, which were in food illustration mostly. I started working for a few magazines and a newspaper, and then moved on to some in-flight magazines. So I recommend starting there if you are interested in food illustration. It's most prevalent in editorial and in publishing, so those are the key areas you want to look into. And for me personally, I found editorial a slightly easier nut to crack. Publishing, I think, is maybe a bit more competitive. Another area to look into would be packaging. That can be a pretty well-paying area of the industry. I would also recommend looking at branding and advertising. I had a question on fees and how much I charge for a single food illustration, and that can vary wildly depending on the usage. So probably the lowest I would go for a small, maybe quarter-page size illustration for a magazine might be about £120, something like that, all the way up to, I think the highest fee I've charged for food illustration is about £750 per illustration, and it ended up being a really large job, so it was very well paid. So yeah, it can really vary wildly depending on where the illustration is going to be used. Make sure you know all of the details of the commission before you offer your quote. Find out where the image is going to be used, and if you have any questions about pricing for a specific commercial commission, do contact me. Maybe via Instagram would be a good idea. Please not my inbox, because that is strictly for business. But yeah, please feel free to contact me if you have a commission and you want to find out how much to charge. I can offer you some advice. I'm sure that many practicing illustrators would be happy to help, because it just helps make sure that we're not charging too little for our time and our work, especially if you're new to the industry. We're nearing the end of this video, so I'll just do a quick round of questions. What type of food would you recommend to start with for painting? Any food that you are interested in and passionate about. How do you find the balance between lots of details and simplicity? I don't often, as you can see from this painting that I'm currently working on. There is a lot going on. My only solution is white space, whether that be in the background or somewhere in the piece. Just a lot of empty space to contrast with the insane detail. How to convert illustrations digitally. I scan my illustrations in and then I use Photoshop to cut out the background and make some edits to the colour and contrast, and then I save, usually as a TIFF file if I'm sending to clients, sometimes a JPEG, whatever they require. Would I ever make a Skillshare class? Yes, I might, if they asked me. Favourite thing to paint other than bread? Something really colourful and maybe with a high shine. Least favourite thing to paint? Probably a salad where it's all just green and kind of boring. How many layers of colours do I use? Impossible to count. How perfect do your initial sketches have to be to send to the client? I usually just send sketches in pencil, and then if they need to see a bit of colour, I will add a few light washes of colour just to indicate where the colour will be, but 90% of the time it's just pencil sketches and then we move on to paint from there. My most asked question, am I permanently hungry? And the answer is a massive yes. I am always snacking at my desk, I am always thinking about meal times because I'm always studying food. Last question, when will the cookbook be out? Will it be out in time for a Christmas gift? I hope to have it out by Christmas, that would be my absolute dream, but it is so much work and I've been working on it for 2 years now. Just fitting it in alongside managing my Patreon account, my Etsy shop, my YouTube channel and my client business with freelance illustration is just so hard to find the time, because as well as creating the illustrations, I am also recipe testing, which takes so much time, but I'm hoping to take a month off at some point over summer and just focus entirely on the cookbook and getting as much of it done as possible, because releasing it in time for Christmas would be my absolute goal. That's it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have any more questions on food illustration, or if you'd like more Speedpaint/Q&A videos like this. Subscribe if you're new. I make weekly videos about my life as a freelance illustrator, and please like this video. I worked hard on it, and I will see you again very soon for more content. Bye!